good to start with the date.
All right. Hello, my beautiful people. Welcome to a new installment that I am doing with, as many of you probably remember from previous talks, with Richard Swatton, who was actually one of my tutors at the London School of Astrology. Richard is an amazing astrologer. He's also a psychotherapist who's been doing that for, I think it's about 30 years now.
Since I was 15, I had an interest, and I'm now in my 60th year.
Amazing. Wow. So Richard, thank you so much for being here. So today is the 19th of December 2020. So we're just gearing up towards that massive great conjunction that everybody's all abuzz with. And I kind of figured that this was a good moment to take a journey like this into it. So as many people can start preparing for using that energy in a more conscious way. So you'll be able to find Richard here on YouTube, and I know he's just about to start posting more videos. I'll put his link in the description bar below. And as you can tell by the title, today we will be talking about astrology, magic, and focus in many different ways. So just to lay some sort of little principles for everybody, when we talk about these things, very often there are terms that are kind of thrown in that we hear, but maybe not necessarily are so clear on. So I want to start with intention, will, and focus. These are literally the principal foundations of any type of magic or spiritual connection or utilization of universal forces. So intention is a direction of focus in a conscious manner. This is where you literally set out an intention around or towards something. So your intention is like a focus or an attention energy that is given a specific target. So we hear about this a lot now with like new moon intentions and full moon intentions. Like we all hear of that stuff nowadays. But I think it's really important to get sort of a very clear grounding of what we mean by that. So then when we delve into the will, we take that a little bit further. This is like the inner drive or the desire or inspiration or action that comes from within. And it's a self-governed, universe-gifted freedom that is that's basically granted to all of us as our birthright. Your will, what you choose, what you desire to act on, that is all you. And when you think of what it is that you want or more towards it, you employ your will. So you're using your will when you set an intention. And then to give you like the third sort of principle around this, focus. Your focus is an intention, but it's the currency of energy that is given and amplified by your thought. So just a little foray into what those all mean. Richard, please, I know you have so much wisdom and wealth. Please share. What do you think?
Well, I think those are very accurate descriptions and definitions to begin with.
Thank you.
And it's a good place to start. If we're talking about magic, I think we also have to have a kind of definition of that. And as you know, I suggested to you, this idea of thaumaturgy,
yes,
and magic and theurgy.
Absolutely.
And we can talk about those terms as well. I don't want to take all this because I wanted to focus on what you've just mentioned, those three things. But I think it's important when you're talking about intention to know that that's a kind of framework, an ambience, or a quality around the thing that you intend to will. Will is in astrological terms very much to do with Mars and Saturn and the Sun. And your mind. We can talk about the astrological correlates later.
Yeah.
Noel Till talked a lot about the the matrix of the will, and he saw that in 3 planetary terms. It's a very interesting discussion. But intention is important because it overlays, as I say, places a framework or an ambience around what you're doing, and so therefore it depends on what your intent is. The higher the intent, the less problems you get into. Now, let me give an example, because I'm writing about this at the moment. We hadn't planned talking about it, but I'm writing about this in terms of horary astrology, right? And horary astrology is the art of divination. You're involved in that as well. But what is our intent on divining something? Do we want to know what the 4:30 at Haydock Park is going to do? Like in 2016, I delivered a lecture at the Astrological conference and said that, and I delivered an horary chart, which showed me that Donald Trump was going to win the US election. And I announced it there. Everybody thought I was crazy. But
just for those of you, by the way, I've seen Richard do this in class, and it's actually phenomenal and sometimes scarily accurate. Like the way that you've picked apart a chart and then it's literally played out. So if you're interested in that, definitely connect with him.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And but here's the important point. When I was reflecting on that for writing about it, the dilemma that I was in at the time is, why am I doing that? Why am I making these pronouncements? First of all, because it was an astrological conference on magic, right? That was why I was doing it. I thought I would try and produce some kind of magical divination in order to not prove, but to demonstrate sometimes that astrology can predict actual things and so on, and there's a magical event. But I talked to Jeffrey Cornelius, who's one of my compatriots in this field, and a very learned gentleman. He's all of that. He used to run the course in Canterbury on esotericism and so on. He's gone online now, and excellent. But we had a long discussion afterwards about this, and what was my intention? And it really made me think, because is the intention to prove how brilliant I am?
No.
Is it an egotistic intention, which some astrologers or divine readers or whatever they are, they're very interested in aggrandizing themselves. And I'm not talking about publicity for our work, that's fine. But there's this sense that if you make a prediction of that sort, or it comes true, then what you have produced is a thaumaturgic effect. And a thaumaturgic effect is a miracle. And but the problem with miracles and changing this, or yes, I did this and so on, is that it aggrandizes the magician's ego. And it also produces a kind of wonder in those people seeing it. And they can endow you with special powers and then think that you're the business. You are the person that predicted. You are do you see what I mean? And then you can get that kind of overinflation.
Yeah.
And that is a danger of our work, that we can become enamored or glowing or surprised ourselves. It's okay. It's okay. We're involved ourselves. But so magic at a low level is the produce of miracle, divination, predictions, or whatever, things come true. And so if we have the intent, you see, of doing it with that in mind, then we might well produce these effects. But the problem is it produces the wrong kind of reaction in clients.
Yeah.
That you can look to an astrology chart or a reading and say, and your interpretation is the end of it. That's what it means. Yes. But you see, and then free will it doesn't have any play. Your actual will in what you do with this is important. So intent is one of the principal things in magic or occultism. We can talk about that. Where should your intent lie? And if you're a theurgist, which is what a magician was 4th century, 3rd century. It's to do with what is called God work.
Mm.
And we don't have to get into any particular theology about what God is or who God is or whether it's male or female, or is it just a force in the universe, or is it consciousness? There's lots of things we can talk about what God is, but it's about divine work. And the idea is that individuals are vehicles for a greater purpose in life.
Absolutely.
Not just their own will, not just their intention, you see. They're allowed to have an individual life. You're allowed to be successful. It's fine. But it can go to your head. If the only thing is your ego and greater self-fulfillment, then the intent is to become bigger, better, more important, have more pleasure, have more of that. There's nothing wrong with having those. As I say, this isn't a moral thing. But if the great work, the magnus opus of the alchemist, is to somehow transform or help other people transform their nature into what it was always supposed to be.
Yes.
You see? Now, and this is the difference between humanistic psychology and Jungian psychology. Humanistic psychology comes out in the 60s and says, self-fulfillment, a self-actualization, you can do it. It's a very, very American thing. Sagittarius is centered on America's charts, right? So very, and Jupiter in Cancer, right? So very abundant, very exalted. You can the dream, the American dream.
Mm.
You can be what you want, you can do what you want, and so on. High expectations. And if you do that, what happens is you get into some form of hubris, that there's no further to go. So all this self-fulfillment, self-actualization of the person, it's good in one way because we were drawing away from what the state defines us as, or the church defines us as that.
Mm-hmm.
But in another way, it leaves us on our own with simply more ego, more experience to fulfill. So we come back to this word intention. If you're a theurgist, in other words, you use magic and these arts for greater guidance of yourself on a spiritual path,
mm-hmm.
which is essentially the evolutionary purpose for which you're born, to find that out and to follow it, to find your true will, if you're a occultist, or in Jungian terms, to find the guardian of yourself, your higher self, or if you're the Theosophists used to call it your higher individuality. In other words, you had personality, which was down here,
mm-hmm.
but your individuality is what you were born to do. So if your intention in readings as a reader is to try and help the person be satisfied with their life in a sense of greater purpose, then that flows throughout all you do. Do you see what I mean? And so the intention of a theurgist is to always say there's something bigger than yourself you're working for. You could call that the transcendentalists or the transpersonalists, like Dame Roger, the great astrologer, said energies work through us for their own reasons. And what we get to do is experience them. That's it. That's all. That's the gift of life. We get to experience life while we're alive and all these things going through us. But if we get caught up too much in the miracles of sensation, let's say, if you take drugs and so on, and I've taken some various bits and pieces in my time, right, and I've enjoyed them, and with your right, and all that, and there's ayahuasca, and so you're allowed to do this, but from what intent? Simply to enjoy? Because, well, you're allowed to enjoy, as I say, but this movement. So intention is very, very important. So the question is, what is your intent? And if you're a diviner and you produce miracles and good readings and it makes sense, and one can get a bit lost in that. And that's what I was doing in 2016. And this talk with Jeffrey Cornelius, who's a diviner himself, great oratorist, it really made me think of that. And that made me not realize, but start to put back our work, tarot, magic, astrology, or those arts into a greater framework of spiritual work, theurgy, divine work. And we can go into that, we can go into the magic of it. And a lot of occultists get lost. A lot of occultists get lost in this because they, the great Israel Regardie, who died a long time ago, 85, I think it was, in his great work, very good work, The Tree of Life, it's still existent. I think it's still, he talks about magic as theurgy, as all of this is about the transformation of our own identities in order to fulfill the divine work or the divine purposes that God or life or the creation has for us.
Love
and
it.
in doing that, you align yourself with your vocation.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean to say you can't do, or I can't say, well, on Tuesday, Mercury turns retrograde, so it's best not to sign any deals, right? And you'll have to stay that way for 21 days. But after this, it moves on and then it hits your seventh house cusp. So ask your partner about it, or whatever. You can give guidance and information on the material plane, but what it's all to do with is accessing your transformative purpose in life. That's the intent.
Absolutely. I love that. And I totally agree. And I think this is one of the things that I try to stress to people on my channel. No matter how on the mark my readings may be, I am still a human being, which means I will fluctuate, I will undulate, I will have moments where I'm spot on, and I will have moments where I'm a bit askew of what spot on might be. And what's important in that, and this is one of the other things I try to stress, don't ever see myself or any other reader as absolute law. What we do is read cosmic signposts. We kind of point you in a right direction that is closer to what you're seeking at the time, partially because we're outside of your life spectrum. So we have a unique perspective that you can't consider because you're emotionally attached to where you are. So me as a tarot card reader, I can place cards down and say, right, okay, these fit with your personal pattern. This is where you are. This isn't me saying this is what you should do with your life, and what I'm saying to you is what you absolutely have to follow. If what I say to you makes sense and it helps you kind of figure out the wood for the trees at that present moment, I've done my job. That's where your intention, your will, your desire for where you want your life to go comes in. And it's so important that in readings, whether with tarot readers, astrologists, spiritual workers, magicians, that you allow your own understanding, energy, thought process, pattern, discernment to come into whatever information you're given. No matter how, like you said, spot on we're still literally just agents of everything else that is out there that is beyond us too. And I think it's a really important point that you mentioned that as readers, and this is one of the reasons I get really frustrated when they talk about astrology and tarot and stuff being, arts of entertainment, because we're held to a higher standard. We should be. If we're tapping into something where we're supposed to be giving signposts to people, we need to be able to hold integrity. We need to be able to hold space. We need to be able to say to people, well, this is what I interpret and this is what I can give you, but the choice must be yours. The choice of what you do with that information and how you employ your own energy is very, very important in that process. And so there it's more like we talk about that co-creative kind of energy rather than Raph or Richard said this is going to happen, so that's what's, I'll just give the rest of my power away to that.
Yes. Well, we're still in the Renaissance, starting from 1900, you and I. In other words, the return of a magical point of view, of a soul point of view, of that there are energies behind our manifestation that we can read to some extent, which is one way of looking at astrology or something, that these patterns, there's something behind, in capitalism, they call it the sphere of Yesod, which is the ninth sphere, which is the foundation of energies prior to incarnation. So It's like that, you know, in many ways, our work is like a scrying in the vision, you know, like we go through the symbol and we see what's happening. And then it's up to us to try and interpret that, you see, but we can tell, you see, so actually astrology is a lot to do with divination, moving through the symbol. You can interpret it in different ways. You can interpret it as a direct communication. I think you should go and do this. Or you can say, well, this one isn't often so shown in astrology, but I tried to do it myself. Certain planetary positions might suggest that you have an attitude change, you know, or that you bring in certain qualities. You know, whenever a person has, let's say, a transit to their sun, rather than going, this and this is what's going to happen as a fatalistic dimension, you say, well, you need more courage. You need to try and find confidence in yourself. And if you don't have a self, try and find one.
Yeah,
you
like
see,
that, point them in the right direction.
Yeah, yes, but the information is more of an energy dynamic. It's more of a, rather than this is going to happen. Do you see? Or it might be psychological guidance, or it might be spiritual guidance in some way. So, you know, you might get a vision halfway, or sometimes I get feelings. I'm a clairsentient in more than a clairvoyant. I pick people up, I pick moods up and things. My Mercury's in Cancer, and then I reinterpret those moods in terms of what I picked up, and then that can happen, you see. And so the view behind manifest reality is what you and I, through magical images, tarot or whatever it is, we're looking into. That's the art of it. Now, a lot of astrologers won't even come near this idea. They just think there's Saturn, that's that, and you interpret it, and Saturn's going to go over your sun, you're going to have a very hard time. Well, no. What is your involvement? This is where Marsilio Ficino comes in, actually, in the 15th century. Natural magic, he was an astrologer, including the soul and your participation in your own future. Before that, it was all providence or fate. You see, so in fact, magic, or this work with symbols, gives us a way of working with energies or patterns or psychological dynamics in order to, in some way, participate in our own fate and our own unfolding.
Love it.
Whereas, but before, that was blasphemy. So they had to hide it in the Renaissance period. They had to hide. Occultism was very hidden and unknown and so on. And they were all Christians, you know. Jot to Don John Dee, the famous Elizabethan astrologer, Campanella, Pico de Mirandola, who else? Giordano Bruno, all of these people which brought knowledge and information of the divine worlds. Maps of the divine worlds, you know, we can look at those. Those are fantastic. They're imaginative, but when you work with them, you find that they point to realities. And in these maps of divine worlds, tarot is in there. Tarot was always used when it came in as a first point of call to do with Kabbalistic path working. That's the thing. That's the first thing you do. You imagine the picture. If you're working the 32nd path, for example, which is the work towards the astral plane, you have to go through an image of the universe, or the world, as you would call it. You actually use it as a doorway, and as you pass through it in your imaginative world, then you start to, you see, so it can be opened, and these are magical entrance zones. And even though we may be just doing a small reading, our mind is penetrating the image. It is moving into it, and we have to do a lot of work to do that, to know all the associations and everything else and what it could mean. And then we get into it, and then it informs us. We don't tell it. You see what I mean? So I think what you're talking about is that we're trying to now place our work, our divinatory work, whether it's scrying or clairvoyance or clairaudience, whatever it is, inside a greater process of spiritual work, or theurgy. But this wasn't allowed. It wasn't allowed in the church, and it's certainly not allowed by science. Yeah, it's all hokum to them. But for people that have worked with images or magical internal work, astral projections, rising on the planes, scrying in the spirit vision, as it used to be called, all of these so-called the lesser mysteries are all an attempt to find out those dimensions of things hidden, occult, behind the manifest world, and to participate with them and then move them on to the greater purposes. So our experiences become journeys. They become that. Now, when you're going through a hard Saturn transit or whatever it is, it's easy to get lost in the emotion of it all, and that's where psychotherapy comes in to help you move through that, to work through the fabrications of your illusions, your self-deceptions and everything else. And that's all lower mystery stuff. But once that's done, there's a greater identity of your own ego and your own purposes with something higher, bigger, more important. And that's what Theurgy is. And I think that's where our work, astrology and all the lesser psychic things should be placed. Otherwise it becomes glamourpuss. Look,
yes,
you know, and I'm not against entertainment. I loved Patrick Walker. In you know, he was great, you know, the sun sign thing, you know, and all that, and wasn't so enamored of Russell Grant, although he kept astrology in the public mind. He was also quite a good astrologer and is a good astrologer, but he was interested in that entertainment. But it can go wrong if you think all of the planets and signs and tarot cards are to do with what you're going to do in the future and what it is. You participate in your fate with your own will. You can turn against it or not. You can be a passive victim to your experience, or you can engage it. And that's where focus comes into it. And a different term for focus, I would say, is more concentration.
Yeah, it's actually better, because it's that's when you understand it. When you think about concentration, you start to understand the currency that your attention actually is. Yeah, love that. And it kind of leads me nicely actually onto the next part that I wanted to kind of give people a bit of an understanding about, which is energy work. And in many ways, I'm grateful that the new age is bringing it more into people's focus. But in a lot of ways, I think we're really starting to lose what that term actually means. Like when you say energy work to someone now, they're kind of like, oh yeah, you know, good energy, bad energy, and it kind of just stops there. And one of the things that I try to impress on people is when we talk about energy, we're talking about, yes, we mean spiritual energy, but we're also kind of trying to bring people back to that understanding. Your entire body is it runs on energy. It's a biodiverse network of neurons and minerals and processes that all run on and produce energy. So we're not talking just about your spiritual energy. When we talk about energy work, it's about employing the entire body of energy that you are, your mind, your soul, your attention, the energy that is produced from your body as heat. Learning to channel that, learning to focus that, to utilize it as part of your intention is a really important part of this process. If you want to utilize your energy, you have to know your energy. And I think this is a big part of where your work comes in, Richard. If you don't know yourself at those basic levels, how can you ever really focus your intent enough to create something other than, and I'll give you a really good example.
Yeah, do.
Lots of people, they say, oh, you know, well, there was this happening and it got really intense and I managed to pull something out of the bag.
Yeah.
You managed to pull something out of the bag because you focused everything that you are on whatever desire was going to fulfill the need that you have. And that's why a lot of magic or miracles, they're born of that real sort of like, holy crap, I'm in trouble. I need to pull something out of the bag here. And, you know, that's how people focus it. Whereas if you can do that conscious work of getting to know yourself, your body, your mind, your soul. All of your energy then suddenly becomes not only palpable, but directable. And then you can start to align that in the theurgical sense with the divine will. I got goosebumps as I said that, because then you start to kind of take yourself almost out of the picture and say, right, if the divine picture is taking me there and I can align with that energy, I don't have to be a salmon anymore and fight the stream. I can just go with it.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, but I think a theme is starting to emerge. People can forget their essential intention. And if you're lost in the moment, energy builds up. Let's say you're involved in an argument with someone. Let's take a real example, right?
Yep.
So you're involved in an argument with somebody and you may be right in your reaction. You may have a point to make. And that needs to be argued. And a good argument is an exchange of views in order to, it's the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's the Hegelian dialectic, as they call it. That you've got a point of view, you've got a point of view. Let's thrash it out, and then we synthesize them. And most people find that you were a bit wrong and you were a bit right, and someone was more wrong or more right in an argument, right? But what happens? Well, somebody hits off a load of inferiorities. Somebody might have an unconscious intention to demean you, or to hurt you, or to take you down. Chop off a bit of your ego because you're being too saucy or something. All of these emotional dynamics. And so in a proper argument, you can be heated, but you don't have to be rude. You can be to the point, all right? But you don't have to be demeaning.
Yeah.
You don't, a lot of people have a lot of contempt. When contempt is, I'm going to dismiss you no matter what. That's a horrible feeling. It leads to shame and humiliation if a person buys it. Oh, I'm worth being contemptible at. You see, so we have to be very careful with these what you call lower emotions. This is theosophy. Lower emotions are emotions of your psychology and so on, and they are valid, all of them. I think in the Renaissance period they would have called minor demons like hate and spite, and and they're going, go on, let his tire.
Give him what for?
let his tire down. Teach him a lesson. And all these things that we're all prone to in accordance with our own psychology, which is where intention is interesting, because if you bring that back, what is the point of this argument? Is it to thrust somebody up against a wall and prove that they were wrong and throw them in prison? Is it to demean them? Is it to teach them a lesson? What one is so important and superior that you have to teach somebody else a lesson? Is it to victimize them? Is it to make them feel horrible? Is it to have power and control over them? You see? And that's all the stuff of psychotherapy, or the psychotherapy of one's psychology. What card is that?
Everything that you described there is Five of Swords.
Five of Swords. Well, there we go.
When I say to people, when I see this, I say to them, you may win the argument, but at what cost? Like if you're, as an example, if you're the sort of person that doesn't swear, you have an argument with someone and before the end of it, you're effing and blinding. Yeah. You've come out of who you are, completely given over to whatever else is going on there, and you've become something that you're not usually. For what? For the sake of winning an argument?
Well, as I say, I think as one great sage said it, there's nothing in the personality that can't be used for the great work. Nothing.
Very true.
Okay,
Very
so
true.
we must be careful not to be moralizing when you and I have a blast, or we forget ourselves or whatever, but our intention isn't to do that. And if we have self-reflection afterwards, then perhaps you can recall where you went a bit wrong and apologize for things that deliberately harm, which you didn't want to at first, but when you let the demons out, they're spitting everywhere. They spit fire and they throw things in your face and everything else. And this is just a different way of looking at it. The psychotherapist would say these are the lower emotions and all that, and we're allowed them because we're allowed to be human. But if you're involved in the great work, if you're involved in theurgy, how do you transform these? How do you transform that argument into something which is magical work, of course? Okay, we've had the experience. Now, how do we transform that in something which is mutually beneficial? How do we do that? Now, you might have to go back and lick your wounds and have your pride altered and so on. And not many people are at a level where they can do that. The other person is the enemy. That's it. My neighbor is terrible. I'm never going to talk to them again. And that's it. And they're allowed to do that, of course, but it doesn't move the thing forward. So I'm saying you're allowed to. You're talking about energy work. A lot of it is to do with, in psychotherapeutic terms anyway, or to do with those problematic feelings of self-worth, lack of confidence, identity problems, confusions, anxieties, and they run around the mind and the feelings and the body. They start accusing things, projections and all that. That's all that kind of work. But there is another kind of work at a more, let's say, yogic level, which we might talk about. So if you've dedicated yourself to spiritual work, eventually, if that's central in you, and you'll get pushed, you'll come back to that and say, what was I doing? What was the point of that? And you'll find that you have dangerous parts of your personality that you let out. We all have. We want to demolish someone in hate.
or in my younger years, definitely.
Revenge and vengeance be mine is one of the primitive ones which keeps countries at loggerheads for thousands of years. Family curses, and so this wasn't right. It's got to be revenged. And there's a kind of blood for blood, old type of magic that I can only be satisfied if blood for blood. And those are instinctual rules of life. It stems from Italian law, as it used to be called. Italian law is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's the John Waynes. You do this to my family, I'll do this to yours.
Yeah.
But we have a higher nature. And I say higher, I mean more transpersonal, that can even transform those very fires of vengeance. Difficult, very, very difficult, especially if you've been abused in life or whatever. You've got a score to settle. You've got a grudge, and then you feel allowed to evoke those, and you may have to do that for many years. You may have to do that until such time that catharsis of it it doesn't get you anywhere, it doesn't change anything. So you then zip up another level and perhaps use a religious form or a spiritual form of acceptance. But psychotherapy is, if you jump to that too much and forgive somebody that's murdered somebody in your family too quickly, there was a case of that in the news. Yeah, I think that's too quick. You have to go through the like grief and loss. You have to go through anger, grief, sadness, depression. You have to then, in order to transform those into I suppose one could summarize it in the end as, well, this happens in life sometimes, no matter what it is. Unfairnesses, grossness, and in this instance, it happened to me.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the end result of perhaps many times work. So there's that energy, but there's also energy work in terms of chakras, and energy work in terms of certain forms or certain practices and exercises in occultism, such as invocations,
Yeah.
God names, things like that, which does change your energy. I mean, one of the first things we were taught, or we were suggested to do when I was in the Western Mysteries in my 20s, I was in a mystery school, and I went through training about 4 or 5 years, and then I moved on to psychotherapy. But one of them was to, it's a bit naughty in a way, but it's to the ability to change atmospheres deliberately.
That's one of the, so I did a video on something similar to this, on the 3 types of empath. Those that can literally feel, you know, things from other people, be they plant, mineral, or atmosphere. Those who could affect plant, mineral, you know, animal and atmosphere, and those who sit in the middle that can do both of those. So yeah, very, very interesting that you mentioned that.
So there's that kind of working with energies, if you like, or what the Hindu tradition calls prana, which is the vital life force, be it sexual, be it vitality, whatever it is. And prana is about breathing, and then breathing those into certain chakras or places or whatever, and then directing those through healing or whatever. So the manipulation of energies in that sense is very, very much linked in with tantra yoga and pranic breathing yoga exercises, which is a direct manipulation of etheric energies or electrical energies or emotional energies for specific purposes. But we're back again. For what purpose? To make a person scared of you, like the witch doctors? You know, to produce a wonder effect so you can get more money for your next appearance, which is not necessarily wrong, but you've got to be careful when you're playing with these things.
Absolutely.
That's where your own personal, constant work on self must be there every day. Spiritual practice every day, even if it's a meditation or a reflection on something.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important. And I think, as we know this as well, if you misuse or abuse these things, they have a way of correcting themselves and really biting you in. I used to, in my younger years and my fouler mouth, I used to call it the astral bitch slap. You know,
I like that.
You know, eventually you'll get you'll go so far and you'll get the clip, you know, up the back of the head to say, hang on, you're overstepping your bounds or your marks here. So interesting. And it kind of reminds me of 2 things. One thing that you mentioned there about the process of forgiveness and anger and grief and stuff, that's, you know, that's effectively transformation or transmutation of an energy. And it's so important. And I've often found the most powerful healers that I've come across tend to be the ones that have had, you know, some really awful event in their life, and they went through all of those stages, and then when they got to the end of it, it was like, okay, I can put that down now, and I can use that energy, that fire, that passion, the you know, all of it that was there specifically to heal something. Not because I want people to say, oh, you know, this healer was the best, but because that's what I'm here to do for my path. Those, for me, I've discovered they tend to be the best healers. And on the other side of it, I've just had, on a personal level, the Mars transit has been through my 9th house. And when it went retrograde, I mean, I can't speak on it here because I don't have the time, but I can definitely say this Mars transit and retrograde has changed me in ways that I never expected. And it's been really beautiful and really challenging and really eye-opening all in one. But yeah, I will definitely say the secrets that I've learned will be with me for life from here for sure. And
you, if I may say, just enter into that just a minute. you being an Aquarian, it will come down to how much you understand, how much wisdom you can take from it, and so on. So you can't help it as an Aquarian that this must be then for knowledge, for humanity, knowledge for yourself, and that can aid your life's purpose through the realm of knowledge and understanding and the dissemination of it. But Mars is slightly different to that. And this is where it's not purely Aquarian. You see, that's how you're integrate your experience through your Aquarianness and a wider vision of the universe and understanding it. So, right. But Mars requires action. In other words, we might understand a physical, a new religion or a new way or something. It opens and extends our awareness, very Jupiterian, but a very ninth house. But Mars demands that we then do something with that, and that might be praying every day or learning how to pray. Even if we can go into prayer, it's a very underused form of spiritual practice, occult practice, actually.
Very.
Israel Regardie had a lot to say about it. Very underused. Rather than going through various energies and so on, prayer is a direct route to the great unmanifest, to the Creator Himself. So prayer is an invocation in it, it's like to Godhead.
Absolutely.
Not just what you want, but it cuts out all the other gods, actually, if you pray to. So, but it's an interesting thing. So Mars would require that you then to take up the cudgels of what you've learned and implement them in your life as an action. Otherwise, that God will not be satisfied with just understanding.
Yeah.
Got me?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. There's a little tidbit of info there. And it's funny you say that, because I can already see, like, now that I'm starting to put it into practice, I can already see how it works and how I'll be able to, obviously I won't share everything because the experience was personal, but I can already see how I'm going to put that out into the world in order to assist people to get to that view themselves. Yes. I know now more of the signposts to utilize to help other people get to where they need to be.
Well, again, it's I think I mentioned this idea that ideas and insights are incomplete action. So that you may have a thing, but it depends whether it penetrates through one's laziness, one's tendency to not do, to put off tomorrow what we should do today, all of that, what they call procrastination. That's a big one in the West, isn't it? In the West, it seems to me that the sign of Jupiter, we may talk about this later, but Jupiter in Aquarius, Jupiter has become more, travel has become via your mobile phone or the internet. It's stopped being the backpack. And we think we're traveling, we think we're connected, you see, but actually it needs to be viscerally experienced, not just mentally experienced. This is the problem with the new Aquarian age or that coming up. That we think we have experience through this. Well, we do, but it's disembodied. It's not. I do a lot of readings online through here, and I've learned to do away with the 20-25% energy loss you don't have with the person in the room. Right, I've learned that, because we can see and all that, and that has to fill in the rest, but it still isn't there. When my image is, broken apart and put into little neutrons that go around the fiber optic network, something is lost in the way, but something is also communicated through it enough to have a semblance of my personality and feeling and so on. Yeah. Depending on tone of voice and the intention and whether I'm being authentic or not, all of those things come into play in communication. Now, I'm getting a bit lost there, but see what I mean? So this whole idea of doing with Mars, and also interesting, you're an Aquarian, you mentioned the difference between personal experience and knowledge. That's interesting. Because I'm a Cancerian, I tend to talk in terms of less abstract principles. I can talk in terms of abstract principles. You know, I've got my moon in Aquarius, so we can wax lyrical on these ideas of theurgy and magic. But what difference does it make in your real life?
Yeah.
How can you actually use it in your emotional being?
Absolutely. My moon is
I talked about changing atmospheres, and that's you can do that if you think of a planet or you think of a tarot card, and that induces, if you've done your work on it, that induces an emotional state or a thought scheme that has a direct emanation, let's say, through your aura, and to change the atmosphere about you.
Yeah, I love that.
So those that can be magical work too. You know, we were taught in a psychotherapy program, which is at the London Sufi Centre actually, when sometimes you must breathe, let's say, or you must try to breathe in line with your client. It's a kind of psychic exercise, so it must be done in trust. When you breathe inside the client, if the client is full of anxiety, you can bring them down from that anxiety by attuning your own breath, let's say, to that person, and that will slow down the pace of your speech. It may even soften your speech, but it mustn't be done as a form of control so much as an aid. See, we're back to intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that can draw a very close rapport, a very close emotional rapport with the client. You need to know what to do with that if you then start feeling as they feel, and that's to do with countertransference and dealing with emotional reactions inside of yourself which have nothing to do with your client. But those are technical details of client practice.
That reminds me of the you know, the quote that says, and it's perfect, you know, just to riff off that for a second.
Yeah, please do.
It's really important, you know, if you are doing any sort of magical work. I think I might be paraphrasing this, but sometimes when you look into the abyss looks back. So, you know, and the whole principle of like attracts like. So again, your intention, your will, your focus, the things that you choose to employ are going to be the things that you attract. So this is one of the reasons it's important to be conscious of what you choose to use those energies for and how you choose to delve into them. And I think it's really important, like you said, it's like grounding. You know, once you've done a work, it's important to ground the excess energy so that it doesn't kind of linger with you. And I think that interpersonal transference that can happen with clients, you know, if you're a reader of any sort, is really important to know how to say, okay, well, that's not mine, and I don't want it in my space. So, you know, make a conscious pull of, right, I'm going to wash that off. Like when I was a massage therapist, yes, they taught us to wash our hands, but in my mind, the intention would be whatever the client has released from their body, their thought form, their energy, their spirit, I'm washing that away as well.
Yes, of course.
It wasn't just like you know, soap and water. There was more intent behind it. And it's the same with any of this work as well.
Well, now we come back to theurgy versus magic and the art of correspondences and everything else. You see, because a magical way of working is to think, let's say it's not just to think horizontally, but vertically. So let's say Jupiter was moving through your ninth house or somebody's house, a chart, and a planet was in there, say the sun, it's going up to the sun. And a classical interpretation of that might be, I think you're going on holiday, right? The person says, well, it's funny you should say that in 3 months I'll do that, and it comes up, you see. And then the person might think, oh, they've read that on my horoscope. It's on my horoscope that I'm going on holiday, right? And then another one will come in and you're saying, well, I think you're going on holiday. They say, I haven't got any money, right? So, but does that make it invalid? No, it means to say that the person needs to extend something in themselves to to get out, to journey, right? To make a trip somewhere. And this could be an internal trip. This could be, reading a 800-page manual on the Kabbalah or something, you see.
Yeah.
and going through all the exercises. What a trip that would be. Or it could be something that they might take up a spiritual practice and continually to do it every day, and all that. Okay, so the interpretation of the symbol is what we do. It is important to remember its archetypal root. What is Jupiter about? Well, Jupiter is about, in this instance, we could choose any planet, the extension of your mind to greater knowledge, the awareness that there are more things in life than that are apparent on the surface. Therefore, it's linked to religious purpose and pilgrimage, and that there's a spirit in you of adventure to try and find out what that is. That's what Jupiter is. Doesn't matter where you do it. You could go to Africa and explore the dark terrains there, in the full of the seat of civilization, the groundedness, if you like, of the whole human race. It all comes from Africa. We're all African, one way or another, when we go back there. See, so that if you want to go down to the depths, you go there. Or if it was Pluto in the ninth house, for example, you might be taking an ayahuasca trip, or you might go to Peru and eat the plant of the dead and go through a transformation process. Fine. Do you see what I mean? But that's a horizontal interpretation. That's something in the material world. But if that material world thing is not linked up, a vertical, you're just producing miracles. It's thaumaturgy. You see, and it doesn't have any, and you'll go through a physical experience, it won't mean anything. Yeah.
It will be another thing to catalogue rather
Precisely.
than something to integrate.
And that's why I prefer to use, with Jupiter and ninth house stuff, the ideas of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a special journey with a sacred purpose, or a sacred destination. Yeah. And that could be in a book, or it could be going down, or you'd see, or it could be working for a church, or a greater social organization, whatever it is, or doing yogic exercises and extending your consciousness beyond the range in which you normally have. These are the vertical interpretations, the spiritual, theurgic. It's not just you're going to get more money if you go abroad to. If you go to Las Vegas and put it on red, you might win so much money.
Absolutely.
What's the experience of that? Well, it's exaltation. Everybody would like to win lots of money, but it's not about the money. It's about an experience of extending and expanding your awareness of the possibilities of life.
Absolutely. And
that's what Jupiter is.
It makes so much sense as well. So, and I don't know if you use Instagram. There's a lot of people,
I don't yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on Instagram, some of them really brilliant at what they do, and some who have it in concept but haven't necessarily, like we said, taken it to another place. And as a really good example, there's a lot of spiritual workers on there that will say, oh, I created this oil on the day that Jupiter moved into Sagittarius, and that's one way of interpreting it. Absolutely. And it makes sense. What you're doing there is employing the planet and the god, or the grabber that Jupiter is, as he moved into his own sign. So that's like a special moment. But if it's just, okay, that's it, have you connected to Jupiter? Have you spoken to him? Have you tried to understand on a broader integrative level what he represents, and how creating that oil or that charm or that whatever actually is going to work in employment? How is it actually going to work in the world? Because it's imbued with something that is not of this world. You have to bring the two together in order for that thing to have the potency that you're claiming it has.
Okay. Well, here we at a bit of a crossroads, perhaps, in our discussion.
This is good.
Halfway through, but it feels as if it's almost there. So this is the difference in interpretation of symbols, and it's not for me, I don't think, as an astrologer, although some astrologers work like this, to give my philosophy of life to somebody else. Some people do that. They set up a school, and that school is for this or transpersonal therapy or something, and they're selling a philosophy. And fine, if you want to do that philosophy, go there. I'm not interested in that, as opposed to what I'm interested in is, I'm on my own path. I have my own practices and so on, but it's not for me to say you should do this with this. But it's the difference between Freudian interpretation and Jungian interpretation. It's of symbols. When Freud was interpreting symbols in dream imagery, he would try and reduce them to the individual themselves. Let's say, you know, a train going under a tunnel is equivalent to sexual intercourse or a desire for sexual intercourse, right? So everything that's pointed up and pointing towards the sun is a phallic symbol. Every cave, every, you know, a handbag from, you know, it's and so on, is to do with the female principle, the yoni, yes, and so on. And so what Freud cleverly did in 1900, he produced an interpretation of dreams. It's a brilliant book. But it reduces symbolism to the known. It takes, and so, and that's what it is. And as an analyst, you see this, symbols come up and they refer to actual events in the past, actual people, and you've got to remember those. They're the lifting of repressions, and you work with it to try and help your reality become more clear about where you've come from and your roots, right? What happened to you in childhood, and this was mother, and so on. So that's a very valid and a very important part, which is what we're talking about with self-fulfillment at the beginning. There's nothing wrong with self-fulfillment, nothing wrong with it. But all you've got to do when you get self-fulfillment is have more self-fulfillment. It's like people that earn a lot of money, all they got to do now is get more money. You know, does it not go beyond that? I have a bias towards theurgy in my work and so on, but that's me. Or working at the psychological level for some reason now, for reasons of development, balance, harmony, teaching, healing, all of that. But the Jungian, this was the difference between Freud and Jung. It's what split them up in 1912. That Carl Jung was his pupil for a while, and they differed as to the meaning of what symbols could do for a person. What Jung did, it was related to the archetypes or the collective humanity, and that some symbols he called symbols of transformation, that they're not only pointing towards your own psyche, but you could literally transform if you understood the symbol in a more depth way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So you may win something when you go to Las Vegas and all that money, and good fortune has benefited you. You could use that, as a lot of people do, maybe I would do, to get a lot more pleasure from it. But in the end, it's a Jupiterian experience, which means there is more to life, you see. And so in a symbolic way, you could transform your life by saying, well, maybe I could use this money to help other people have this experience.
Yes. Yeah. And suddenly it takes on a whole bigger and much broader and actually more fulfilling role in your life. You know, I think, I can't remember who it was that said that the person that gives is the person that receives the most. And it's true, you know, when you, and I'm not talking about, you know, depleting yourself and being a martyr and chucking stuff out. It's more a case of giving with the intent of sharing the experience that you're having. It makes it so much more, just more, you know, than what it would be if it was just you on your own. And yeah, look at me, I'm living in a mansion, but I'm lonely and bored. You know, if you can take that and spread it out, it becomes so much more.
Again, it's the difference between Freud and Jung. Freud is, to some degree, a rather human psychology. It says the best you can do is control the id, and control the human impulses, and try to not get them too unleashed, and then settle down in culture and make a peace with it. Jung is talking sometimes. Jung's patients, he had a lot of patients in their 40s, and what they found was that they may have been successful at that, but they were still lacking an intrinsic religious or transpersonal experience. And so what he was trying to do was elevate the symbol to a total change of perspective on life, to go up a notch behind the occult thing, to go behind the material success and all that, go up above that and see that there is a vertical movement towards higher and higher understanding, awarenesses, consciousness. And so what Jung was doing about was, there are some, we talk about vengeance, right? Let's be practical. Or you've had a trauma, you've had something really, and it just plagues you, and no therapy in the world is going to eke that out and get rid of it. No self-worth is going to say, yes, you're brilliant, don't worry. No forgiveness is going to come along, really. And I mean this, if you forgive too early, it's a false forgiveness. Sometimes you can't forgive the unforgivable. Somebody's murdered your child, you've been raped by somebody, you know what I mean? These are dangerous things, and they happen, and they impinge themselves on the emotional sphere of a person, and there's no way you can make that go away. But what you can do is you can try and make it go away as much as you can, healing and soothing, and then pop up a level and go, this happens, I was one of the victims, there we go. That's one of the positive dimensions of that card.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do it on its head and say, actually, maybe this has another purpose. And a lot of people with these problems transform them by another level, and then they use them to help other people with the same problem. Exactly what you were talking about. So it's a transcendence, not transcendence as going, oh, or pretending it didn't exist, but accepting the suffering. It's a very Christian mythology, that you accept what suffering you have to do, and then it gets elevated on a different level. It's not that you shouldn't have suffering, but you experience it in a different way.
Absolutely. And that comes through the Wheel of Fortune.
Oh, does it?
So, yes, and it's really interesting that you
don't know a lot about that card. Maybe you
there's lots of, and it's really interesting that you talked about Jupiter, because the Wheel of Fortune to me, or in the system that I use, is Jupiter. So there's this idea that this card actually represents, like the Wheel of Fortune. It represents the things that are beyond us, but it's also understanding that there is a higher reason, a higher perspective, that if you can glimpse of, suddenly when you find yourself having the experience of the Hanged Man, so say you're here normally, but then you find this, so the wheel spins and you find yourself suddenly at the Hanged Man, it gives you a completely different perspective. And it's one of the reasons actually that he's got the halo. He finds that enlightenment through the surrender to what is. I can't change this. There's nothing that I can do with it. But what I can do is align with where it's taking my life, and therefore all the understanding and the wisdom from it. So yeah, I love what you talk about there. Thank you so much, because those.
I just want to.
Brilliant.
Thank you. To add something of a practical importance. As psychotherapeutically, to move on from trauma, and you have to go through the process. It teaches you a lot, but how do you move on? Usually a transpersonal process, some kind, meditation or magical work, but every satisfaction of an emotional level that can't be possible, because you can't turn back the clock and pretend you didn't have that experience. There are some damage in one's emotional life which are too strong for it to be healed and smoothed over and some salve put on it.
Yep.
But what I found in I became a psychotherapist in '94. What I found in my own life is there has to be a sacrifice of the vengeance that you want, that you've got to put aside your need for your resentments for your pound of flesh, as the Merchant of Venice would have it, which is one of the greatest plays that I believe it's one of the greatest plays that Shakespeare wrote. It's the problem of humankind that it's not fair. If you made a deal with somebody and they renege on the deal, you feel it's unfair. And it's got before it, you even for lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes, this has got to happen. I want my pound of flesh. And if you're not going to give me the money, you're going to carve it off of I don't care how painful it is. This is a deep, remember Italian law, that kind of emotional law, which says, I can't go on unless I've been vindicated. I've had my say. That can be sacrificed. And a sacrifice is a conscious intention to put whatever satisfactions you thought you could have in doing that to one side. And it needs to be worked with. It needs to be worked with prayer. It needs to be worked with psychotherapy, which will work with the unconscious. It's not just you deciding mentally to do it. Sacrifice is a ritual.
Yeah.
And you may have to do it every day for a year, for 2 years, until you can say, I give up my need to that. It's right that I had the need. It might be touched off in my lifetime again, but I'll have to give it over. As you said, this transcendence, this where is my life leading? Otherwise, you are sucked in entirely to the trauma, to the victimization, and your life does not move where it's headed. It's stuck in there, you see. And I think that's a practical thing that to get over that. It's not just about forgiveness. It happened. Maybe you can't forgive. But yes, the weighing up. Love that card. To transcend your desire to get even. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how you transmute the energy. That's what temperance actually means. It's taking the energy from one thing and turning it into something else. This is what we talked about earlier about, the best healers, the most, and I use the term almost loathingly actually, because it takes the true meaning out of it, but the most powerful healers I know are the ones that have gone through a process like that. And some of them will even say, that might never heal, but I don't let it do that now. What I let it do is this, and this is a much higher way of utilizing that energy or transmuting it or alchemizing it.
Okay, and in astrology, we call that the planetoid Chiron. That all healers have an unhealable wound, and they have to work at it constantly. It might be bleeding every day, but you don't have to go into the pain of it after a while and work from that pain. Otherwise, you don't move beyond it.
Love that. One of the things that I said to somebody in a reading not too long ago, actually, was if you're healed, be healed. Don't keep looking for, the thing that needs to be healed. If it's already healed, let it be healed. Understand what's there and what needed to be healed, but allow yourself to move beyond that, for sure. Love it. Brilliant.
Well, again, I'll just add something in a practical sense, that you might have days where you go back into your depression or your anxiety or your desire. You're allowed to have that as well.
Yeah.
That's the emotional part of it, going, I'm still here, You're not going to repress me.
Yeah.
Anything wrong with me. You're not going to do that. Don't forget it. Don't change my memory. And you go, yes, okay, but we're not forgetting. We're sacrificing your need to get vengeance.
Yeah.
And then move on. And we understand that you're hurting, and that hurt may last a lifetime and it will come back, but it gets smoother. I'm talking about loss here. And also many people that I've seen in their 50s and their 60s, and they come into psychotherapy for the first time, and one of the unfortunate things about looking at your life and like that is they start regretting what they haven't done. That why didn't we do this sooner? Why didn't it, and one has to mourn the loss of that and get on with the future.
Absolutely. Richard, I really, really want to do a part 2, possibly 3 and 4 on this, because there's so
Oh,
much for us to unpack.
we've just touched the surface. We could go
Really,
the planets. I just talking about Jupiter as one, but there's so many things. Yes, and perhaps actual technical workings of magic and prayer and what you do and how you work inwardly with the imagination. All of that is the substance of what we've been talking about. We've been talking about it generally and its application a little.
absolutely. Well, guys, as I said, I'm going to put the link to Richard's channel in the description bar below so you can find him and connect with him over there. Richard, it's been my pleasure and always is to have you on. Loads of people always say to me like, oh, you know, I love the talks that you guys have done. They've been great. It's really, really an honor to have you. I look forward to the next one. And with that said, everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.
Yes, we'll maybe see you soon. Hope so. See ya.